Picture yourself on a gray autumn morning in 1906 on a cobbled street on the edge of Berlin. You are a young Prussian soldier, a grenadier, and you are tired. You have just come off duty and all you want in the world is your barracks, your bunk, and the end of a long shift. Your boots are loud on the stones. The Kaiser's Germany hums around you orderly and proud, and you are one small, obedient cog in the most disciplined military machine on earth. And then a voice cuts across the street, sharp, certain, the voice of an officer. Halt. You stop before you have even decided to stop. Your body does it for you the way it has been trained to do it 1,000 times. You turn, and there he is, a captain. The dark blue tunic, the epaulettes, the high collar, the peaked cap, the whole unmistakable outline of a Prussian army captain, standing in the street as though he owns it. He looks you up and down. He tells you that you are now under his command. He does not show you a written order. He does not explain himself. He does not need to, because he is a captain and you are a grenadier. And in the Germany you were born into, that is the entire conversation. So you fall in, and you are not alone. He gathers up more of you, a handful of soldiers off the street and a few more from a guardhouse, until he has a little squad at his back, rifles and all, and he marches you onto a train and out of the city and into a quiet suburban town called Köpenick, where he will walk into the town hall, arrest the mayor, seize the town treasury, and give a signed receipt for it. And every single one of you will help him do it, proudly, without one question. Now hold that morning in your mind, that sharp voice, that blue tunic, because here is the thing that should stop you cold. That man was not a captain. He had never been a captain. He was a 57-year-old ex-convict cobbler, a shoemaker with a criminal record and no home and no papers, who a few hours earlier had been nobody at all. He had not forged a single document. He had not told a single clever lie. He had simply put on a costume, a second-hand uniform, bought in pieces from pawn shops, and discovered that in the right costume, in the right country, you do not need to steal anything. People hand it to you and salute while they do. Evening. I'm Eddie. Pull the door to behind you, mind the coat rack, and sit yourself down. I've been waiting all day to tell you this one, because it is, I think, the purest con I have ever put in front of you. If you've not sat with me before, here's the shape of my little vice. I collect swindlers, forgers, impostors, sellers of things they never owned, the whole beautiful rogues gallery of history's cleverest liars. I take them down off the shelf one at a time, and you and I turn them over in the lamplight and marvel at the sheer nerve of the human animal. I'm a fan, I'll admit it freely. Never pulled a real con in my life. The nearest my mate Sully and I ever came was talking our way into a members' club we had no business being in, on the strength of a borrowed blazer and a very confident nod, and we got 2 glasses of good brandy out of it before a real member asked Sully which year he joined, and Sully said, and I quote, "Oh, ages ago," and we left rather quickly. So no, I'm not the operator. I'm the fellow in the cheap seats leaning forward, whispering how did he do that? And tonight I have got the best answer to that question I have ever found, because most of my favorite liars need a tool. They need a forged signature, a fake deed, a false name written down somewhere, a silver tongue, a rigged wheel, some device to make the lie stand up. This man needed none of it. This man walked into a shop, bought some second-hand clothes, put them on, and captured a town. An entire town. The mayor, the treasury, a squad of the Kaiser's own soldiers, all of it taken with nothing but a costume and the flat certainty of a man who has decided to be obeyed. His name was Wilhelm Voigt, and history remembers him by a much better title, the Captain of Köpenick. He was a broke old shoemaker with a prison record, And for one glorious afternoon he was the most obeyed man in Prussia. Let me tell you how a costume stole a town, and why the mark, the real mark, was not the mayor at all. Let me give you the man first, and the honest edges of what we know, because with a story this good it's easy for the polish to become the point, and I'd rather you had the truth under the polish. Wilhelm Voigt was born in Prussia in 1849, in a town called Tilsit, out on the eastern edge of the German world. He was a cobbler by trade, a shoemaker, a maker of practical things for practical feet. And he was, from a young age, a criminal, not a grand one, a small one. Thieving, forgery of the petty sort, in and out of jail across the decades. By the time our story finds him, he is 57 years old, and he has spent a very large fraction of his life behind bars for one thing or another. He is not a mastermind. He is not a gentleman thief. He is an old man with rough hands and a long record and no money and, crucially, no place in the world. Now, the caveat, and I'll give it to you straight, because I always do. Voigt's story became a legend almost the instant it happened, and legends grow decorations. There is a famous play which we'll come to, and countless retellings, and along the way the exact numbers wobble. How much money he actually took, exactly how many soldiers he rounded up, the precise words the Kaiser supposedly said. Where the accounts differ, I'll tell you they differ, and I won't pretend to a precision the record doesn't have. But the spine of this, the ex-convict, the second-hand uniform, the commandeered soldiers, the seized town hall, the arrested mayor, the emptied treasury, and the astonishing, delighted aftermath. That spine is solid history. It happened in October of 1906, and it is one of the best documented practical jokes ever played on an entire nation. But before I show you the con, I have to show you the thing that made him do it, because this is where the story turns from a caper into something with real teeth. Wilhelm Voigt was trapped, not in a cell, worse. He was trapped in paperwork. Here is the vice he was caught in, and I want you to feel how perfectly, stupidly cruel it is. In Imperial Germany, to live and work anywhere legally, you needed papers, a residence permit, the right stamps, a passport of sorts, permission from the state to simply exist in a given place and earn a given wage. But Voigt was an ex-convict, and as an ex-convict the authorities would not give him those papers. He was not wanted. He was to be moved along, refused, expelled from one district after another. And here is the jaws of the trap closing. Without the papers, he could not get legal work. Without legal work, he could not establish himself anywhere. Without establishing himself anywhere, he could never get the papers. Round and round, a closed loop, a bureaucratic catch-22 with no door in it. The very state that had punished him for his crimes now refused to let him stop being a criminal. It had made him, in the most literal sense, a non-person. A man the system had erased while leaving his body standing there, hungry and cold and utterly, officially, nobody. And I want you to sit with the bitter irony of that, because Voigt certainly did. He was destroyed by paper, by stamps and permits and the absence of the right document. The whole crushing machinery of the German state, which worshipped order and rank and correct procedure above almost everything, had used that machinery to grind one old shoemaker into nothing. So when he finally struck back, he did not strike back with a gun or a bomb or a speech. He struck back by taking the thing that had beaten him, the blind, automatic worship of official authority, and turning it, like a mirror, straight back onto its owners. The state ran on obedience to uniforms and rank. Very well, Voigt thought. Then I shall become a uniform and a rank, and we shall see how obedient you all are. And here is the lever, the beautiful, terrible lever, and it's the whole engine of this story, so let me make sure you feel it. In Wilhelmine Germany, the Germany of Kaiser Wilhelm II, all mustache and medals and spiked helmets, the military uniform was very nearly a holy garment. The army was the pride of the nation, the spine of the state, the thing a proud German pointed to. An officer was not merely a man with a job. An officer was authority made visible, and the reflex to defer to him, to snap to obey without question, was drilled into the population so deep it had stopped being a choice and become a kind of instinct. Think about what that means. It means that the uniform did the thinking for people. A civilian saw those epaulets and that cap and simply yielded. A soldier heard that clipped officer's tone and his spine straightened before his brain engaged. Nobody asked the captain for his orders, because you did not ask the captain for his orders. Asking was itself a kind of insubordination, a crack in the beautiful machine. The whole society had agreed, without ever quite saying so, that the costume was the man, that the rank was real because everyone treated it as real, and that to question a uniform was very nearly to question Germany itself. And Voigt, this beaten old cobbler, this non-person the state had erased, understood that reflex better than the generals who relied on it, because he understood it from underneath. He had spent his whole life being on the wrong end of official authority, and so he could see, as the comfortable and the powerful could not, that the authority was not in the men at all. It was in the cloth. It was in the shared agreement to obey the cloth. Take a nobody, take the lowest, most erased nobody in all of Prussia, and wrap him in that cloth, and the whole obedient nation would salute the nobody and never once look at the face above the collar. The uniform was a skeleton key to an entire country, and Voigt decided to go and buy one. So how does a broke old shoemaker acquire the uniform of a Prussian army captain? Not from the army, obviously. He assembled it, piece by piece, the way you'd assemble anything when you have no money and a great deal of patience, from second-hand shops and pawnbrokers, the dusty little places where the cast-off things of a military nation quietly pile up. A tunic here, a cap there, trousers, boots, the epaulets, the belt, the whole visual grammar of rank, bought a bit at a time, mismatched and used and probably not quite regulation if you'd examined it closely. And that's the thing, nobody was going to examine it closely, and Voigt knew it, because that is precisely how the reflex works. Nobody checks the uniform. The uniform is what stops the checking. He did not need a perfect officer's dress. He needed the silhouette. He needed enough of the shape of authority that the reflex would fire, and the reflex, once it fires, fills in all the rest for you. Your own trained deference paints over the mismatched buttons. There's a detail here I love because it tells you everything about the man. This was a shoemaker, a maker and mender of worn things, a person whose whole trade was taking second-hand, broken-down materials and working them patiently into something that functioned and looked right. And that is exactly what he did with the uniform. He cobbled it together. The most important costume in modern German history was assembled by a cobbler out of other people's leftovers, in the same patient, practical, workmanlike way he'd have resoled a boot. He wasn't a genius. He was a craftsman who'd finally found the one thing worth making. The 16th of October, 1906, Voigt puts on the uniform, and the moment he does, something extraordinary happens. The world rearranges itself around him. He steps out onto the street, and he is no longer a hunted, paperless old man to be moved along by any constable who fancies it. He is a captain. He walks like a captain because he has watched captains all his life. He holds his chin like a captain, and Prussia, seeing a captain, becomes a captain's Prussia. He finds his first soldiers on the street, a small group of grenadiers by the accounts, coming back from their duties, exactly the tired young men I put you among at the start of all this. He simply takes command of them. He gives the orders in the right voice with the right words, and they obey because of course they obey. He's a captain. He gathers up a few more, some from a guardhouse. The exact tally wobbles between tellings, call it around a dozen or so armed men. The precise number is one of those details the legend has polished. And not one of them asks the question. Not one of them says, "Sir, might I see your orders?" Because the reflex has fired and the reflex does not permit the question. He has, standing on a public street with no authority whatsoever beyond a second-hand tunic, acquired a private army of the German Empire, rifles and all. And rule one of any Khan, my friend. You do not persuade the mark. You let the mark persuade himself. Voigt never argued a single soldier into following him. He never made a case, never showed a paper, never won anyone over. He simply presented the costume with total conviction and let every man's own training do the rest. Each soldier looked at the uniform and concluded all by himself that here was a captain to be obeyed. And a conclusion a man reaches on his own is a conclusion he will defend. They weren't fooled so much as they fooled themselves, on cue, exactly as they had been raised to. Then he marches them to a train, and he takes his little borrowed army out of Berlin to the quiet town of Köpenick. Today it's a borough of Berlin, but then it was a separate town with its own town hall, its own mayor, its own treasury. And this is where the audacity goes from delightful to almost operatic, because a lesser man, an ordinary chancer, would have grabbed something small and run. Voigt did not grab and run. Voigt conducted a military occupation. He marches his soldiers to the town hall, the Rathaus, and he takes it. He posts his men at the doors and the exits, sealing the building, all of them believing they are on legitimate duty under a real officer. He goes inside, and he places the mayor of Köpenick, a man named Georg Langerhans, under arrest. The mayor of an entire town, arrested by an old shoemaker in a pawn-shop tunic, and the mayor complies because what is the mayor to do? There is a captain with soldiers, with the whole visible authority of the Imperial German Army standing in his office. The mayor asks reasonably on what authority, on what warrant, and the answer is simply the uniform. The uniform is the warrant. He arrests the town treasurer too. He orders the building held. And then he does the thing that turns the whole caper into a work of art. He takes the town treasury, about 4,000 marks, though again the figure varies a little in the telling, and he confiscates it formally as an officer requisitioning funds. And he gives a receipt. He does not simply pocket the money like a thief. He writes out an official-looking receipt for it, signs it, reportedly with the name of a former prison director, a man from his own long unhappy history, which if true is a joke so dry and so bitter I could stand up and applaud it, and hands it over. He is playing the part all the way down. A real captain requisitioning funds would issue a receipt, so the fake captain issues a receipt. He even orders the arrested mayor to be sent to Berlin under guard, to headquarters, to sort out the paperwork. Which is to say, he uses the very machinery of official process, the thing that had erased him, as the cover for walking out with the cash. And here's the part where a smash-and-grab man gets greedy or stupid and gets caught, and Voigt, once again, doesn't. Having sealed the building, arrested the officials, taken the money and dispatched the mayor to Berlin, he simply leaves. He slips away. The great occupation dissolves as quietly as it assembled. He goes off, changes out of the captain's uniform and back into the plain clothes of an ordinary, unremarkable older man, and the instant the costume comes off, so does the captain. The authority evaporates because it was never in him. It was in the cloth, and the cloth is now a bundle under his arm. Georg Langerhans, the mayor, is trundled off to Berlin to report to a headquarters that has no idea what he's talking about. The soldiers, their captain gone, are eventually left standing about wondering, slowly, terribly, whether they have just been part of something that was not, in fact, an official operation of the Imperial German Army. And Wilhelm Voigt, the Captain of Köpenick, becomes once again what he has always been, a nobody in a crowd. An old man nobody looks at twice, which is the one disguise better than any uniform. He was free for about 10 days, and then he was arrested. The old record, the known associates, the loose ends, the same machinery caught up with him in the end, as it generally does. But by the time it did, something had happened that no policeman could arrest, and it was the best part of the whole story. Germany had heard what he'd done, and Germany was laughing, because here is the twist that lifts this above every clever theft I've ever shown you. When the story got out, the ex-convict, the pawnshop uniform, the commandeered soldiers, the arrested mayor, the emptied treasury, the receipt, the German public did not recoil in horror. They roared. They adored it. Overnight, Wilhelm Voigt was not a criminal. He was a folk hero. And why? Because everyone, deep down, understood exactly what he had proved. He had held up a mirror to the whole strutting culture of Prussian militarism, the uniform worship, the reflexive obedience, the way a nation of intelligent people would jump to attention for a scrap of blue cloth without asking a single question. And the reflection was so absurd and so true that the only possible response was laughter. He hadn't just robbed a town. He had performed the sharpest piece of political satire in the country's memory. And he'd done it not with a pen or a pamphlet, but with his own body, in real life, starring the German army as the fool. Every joke the ordinary German had ever privately thought about officers and their heirs, Voigt had made flesh. And the mark laughed hardest of all, because Kaiser Wilhelm II himself, the supreme warlord, the man at the very top of the whole pyramid of uniforms and deference, was, by the accounts that come down to us, hugely amused. He is said to have called Voigt an amiable scoundrel. Sit with that. The emperor whose army had just been made a laughingstock by a shoemaker in second-hand clothes, chuckling about it, charmed. Sentenced to 4 years for the affair, Voigt served only about 20 months, and then the Kaiser himself pardoned him in 1908 and let him go. The head of the German state personally reached down and forgave the man who'd exposed the whole con of his own authority, which is, when you think about it, the most elegant possible admission that the joke had landed. And what does a folk hero do with his freedom? Voigt became a celebrity, a proper, working celebrity of the kind we'd recognize today. He toured. He sat for photographs, the old man now dressed up once more in the captain's uniform for the cameras, cheerfully reenacting the very crime he'd been jailed for, this time for money and applause. He appeared at exhibitions. There was a wax figure of him. He was modeled at a Berlin waxworks, and his likeness would later stand in Madame Tussauds itself, the captain in wax beside the kings and the generals he had so gently humiliated. The non-person the state had tried to erase became one of the most recognized faces in the country. He dined out on the tail, quite literally, for the rest of his life. The man who had no papers, no place, no permission to exist, ended up more famous than the mayor he arrested. And the story refused to die with him. In 1931, the playwright Carl Zuckmayer took it, and made it into a stage play, Der Hauptmann von Köpenick, the Captain of Köpenick. And that play cemented the whole affair as the classic German satire of uniform worship, the definitive send-up of a society that would obey a coat before it would trust its own eyes. Zuckmayer understood what Voigt had instinctively grasped, that the real subject was never the 4,000 marks. The real subject was the reflex. The money was almost a footnote. What Voigt had actually stolen, and what the whole world recognized he'd stolen, was the illusion that authority lives in the men who wear it, rather than in the crowd that agrees to obey it. So let's ask the real question, the one underneath all the delight. Not how did he do it, we've watched him do it, and it was almost insultingly simple. The real question is worse. Why did it work? Why did trained soldiers, a mayor, a treasurer, a whole town, hand themselves and their money over to a costume, with never a single person saying the 4 small words that would have ended it instantly? Show me your orders. And the uncomfortable answer is the same one that runs through every con I keep on this shelf. It worked because nobody wanted to be the one to check. Think about the position of that grenadier on the street. To ask the captain for his orders is to risk being wrong, to risk being the insubordinate fool who challenged a real officer and gets a dressing down, or worse, for his impertinence. The cost of questioning authority in that society was high and immediate and personal. The cost of just obeying was nothing, or seemed like nothing. So every single person in the chain did the safe, easy, sanctioned thing. They obeyed. They assumed that if this captain were not genuine, surely someone else, someone more senior, someone whose job it was, would already have stopped him. Each person trusted that somebody else had checked, and in that gap, the gap between a thing that looks like authority and a thing that has actually been verified as authority, one old shoemaker marched an army, took a town, and walked out with the cash. A costume works, my friend, precisely because nobody wants to be the one who questions it. That's the whole trick. It isn't that people can't tell. It's that people daren't ask. And here is why I really keep this one, why I didn't just tell it to you for the sheer gorgeous cheek of it, because it is about you and me a great deal more than it is about a dead Prussian in a borrowed tunic. We like to think we're the clever ones. We'd have asked. We'd have spotted the mismatched buttons, the old man's face above the collar, the whole absurdity of it. But would you? Really? Because authority is very often just exactly this, a costume, plus everyone's shared agreement to obey it. And we live surrounded by the costume every single day. The badge on a lanyard, the high-vis vest, the clipboard and the confident stride, the official-looking email with the right logo at the top, the uniform, the title, the tone of voice that expects to be obeyed. How much of the authority you deferred to this week, moved aside for, handed your details to, did what it said, did you actually check? Or did you just see the costume, feel the old reflex fire, and fill in all the rest yourself, exactly as those soldiers did on that Berlin street 100 years ago? Because the con man's dream, the modern one, is precisely Voigt's dream. He doesn't want to break into your life. He wants to walk in wearing something you've been trained not to question, the fake official, the bogus inspector at the door with a plausible badge, the voice on the phone that says it's your bank, your tax office, the police, said in exactly the tone that expects your compliance. It is the Captain of Köpenick, reborn every single day, betting, always betting that you will obey the costume before you dare to ask whether the man inside it is real. So that's my question for you tonight, and I do read the comments, so come down and find me. When have you obeyed a costume? When did you defer to a uniform, a badge, a title, an official-looking something, purely because questioning it felt rude or risky or like being the awkward one, and only realized later that you'd never actually checked whether the authority behind it was real at all. And the flip side, the one I'm greedy for. Have you ever been the one brave enough to ask the 4 small words, "Show me your orders," prove who you are, and watch the whole confident act fall apart the second you did? Tell me both. The time the costume fooled you and the time you stopped and asked. Those stories keep the rest of us honest. Put them below. And if you like sitting in the cheap seats with me, taking history's greatest cons apart to see what makes them tick, subscribe, and stick around, because there's a new one every few days, and I've a whole gallery of beautiful liars still to introduce you to. The man who sold a monument he did not own, the forger who fooled an empire and got paid for it, the impostor who convinced a whole family he was their own dead son. My nephew, sharp lad, thinks he's uncatchable, and last year he very nearly handed his savings to a phone call. A calm, official voice claiming to be from the fraud department of his own bank, using all the right words, all the right tone, the whole audible uniform of authority, telling him to move his money to a safe account right now. It was the Captain of Köpenick down a telephone line, 120 years on. No real authority at all, just a costume made of confidence, betting he'd obey before he checked. He caught it with a minute to spare, and only because for 1 second he stopped asking, "Does this sound official?" and started asking, "Have I actually checked who this is?" That one question is the whole defense. It always has been. I'll leave you with this. Wilhelm Voigt never fired a shot, never forged a paper, never told a clever lie. He simply understood that a whole nation had agreed to obey a costume without ever looking at the man inside it, and he put the costume on. He walked off with a town on the strength of it, and then walked off with the whole country's affection for having shown it the truth about itself. So the next time something in a uniform or a badge or an official voice tells you to do the thing right now, no questions. Do the one small, slightly embarrassing, faintly insubordinate thing that would have saved a town a great deal of trouble. Don't obey the costume. Ask to see the man. I'm Eddie. Mind the confident strangers and mind the ones in uniform most of all, and that's how you lose your shirt.